Hi and welcome. This is Homebody Rundown. I'm HR, and in this video I'm going to be sharing some of the meals and desserts I made for my family. The kids are all home from school now, so I am typically cooking for 5. 3 of us eat a mostly pescatarian or vegetarian diet, but we are not strict with it, so I am occasionally using ingredients that are not vegetarian. And you won't see much of it in this video, but I am sometimes cooking or prepping meats at different times for the kids that do eat those. Not a recipe channel. I rarely follow a recipe, even when I'm referencing one, but if it's available online, I will put it in the description. Just realize I have probably changed a few things, and I'll try to add that into the description as well. And just as a disclaimer up front, if you've watched any of my other cooking videos, there is nothing new or exciting in this one. I usually try to do one new thing, and it just did not happen. Starting off with blueberry muffins. I make these quite often, so I don't add as much sweetness that I would usually add if I was making these for other people. My family is used to these not being quite as sweet as the original recipe calls for. So into the KitchenAid mixer, I have oil, an egg, and I replace part of the sugar with maple syrup, at least typically if I have it. Getting the egg mixed in with these ingredients before I add in the milk. And sometimes I use reconstituted milk, and sometimes I just use the kids' 2% lactose-free milk that I have in the fridge almost all the time. For the dry ingredients, I do replace part of the all-purpose flour with whole wheat flour. I occasionally will add flaxseed into this as well. And because I'm using the whisk on my KitchenAid, I do not use the KitchenAid to mix in the blueberries. I always do that by hand. Plus, like with KitchenAid mixers with everything, I have to make sure that all the ingredients from the bottom really got incorporated. And here's how they look coming out of the oven. I have this recipe set to just make 12. That's why I add 1 cup of blueberries, not overflowing cup, or they will not fit in these little muffin papers that I get. Here's how it looks on the bottom. I really do like these ceramic muffin pans that I have. They just seem to bake very evenly. Here's the inside. So this one had quite a few blueberries. If I don't pay attention, I usually end up with one at the end that has almost no blueberries in it, but this one was a winner, and these taste great. Going to be soaking beans overnight. I have pinto beans and black beans. Now before I soak them, we do sort through them. You'll see here there's a lot of little clumps of dirt, and then I will find, sometimes you find a bean that's not in good condition or just the wrong kind of bean. I do notice this more when I get beans from Azure Standard, that there's other types in there, but we don't have any allergies or anything. It's not a big deal. For tonight's dinner, I'm going to make a black bean and rice stovetop mix, but not all the kids would like to eat that. So with part of the pinto beans, I made refried beans and made some quesadillas and burritos, and I made a few extra. That's just really nice to have in the refrigerator for lunches. For the black bean mix, I am first going to cook onions and peppers in avocado oil. I do season this with salt. Other seasonings include ancho chili powder, cumin, and typically I add smoked paprika as well, but I don't think I did on this time. I had roasted garlic that I defrosted from the freezer. I make that in large batches. It's just garlic and olive oil. And there was corn left over because I do put corn into quesadillas. I threw that in the pan along with rice, and this is rice that was already cooked, so I didn't have to worry about making that on this night. This is mostly black beans, but I had a little bit of the refried beans left over as well, so those are in here, along with some Jack's Cantina salsa and a couple of small tomatoes that really needed to get used up. This, I don't know why I did this. This is cilantro that I had cleaned and prepped, but to freeze it, I went ahead and just put it in, I think, olive oil. I don't know why, but I just thought that might be easier to use, and you know, it tasted good. I mean, you could taste the cilantro flavor in there. And here is my bowl. I added some Greek yogurt. Kids typically do sour cream, and I added sriracha to mine. We also have Cholula hot sauce. I don't know why I grabbed the sriracha this time, I just did. I was roasting pecans, and I decided to go ahead and roast, I think it was almost a full bag of walnuts. This was a big bag from Sam's Club. And I'm going to use the food processor to chop these, and then I'll just have them in little jars. They're already roasted and ready to use. And the pecans I chop much more finely. Typically I add them to baked goods on occasion, but then I really like to add them to oatmeal or my yogurt. So I want these pretty small. And I do this in batches. I didn't put all of those into the food processor at once. My food processor is not that big, but this is really convenient. And I do store all of these either in the refrigerator or the freezer because they will go rancid. When I open a bag of the nuts like pecans, almonds, or walnuts, I will typically fill a jar full that we can keep out to snack on. And especially the walnuts, I think those are really a healthy one to snack on. And getting the pecans and walnuts into jars. Here you can see the walnuts I did not chop as finely. I really like the larger texture, especially in baked goods for the walnuts. I've made sauces sometimes, savory sauces with toasted walnuts in them, and I don't like them to be too fine. Like, you want to be able to still taste that it's a walnut. Most of the walnuts I will put into the freezer, and I do the smaller jars because I just don't usually need a large quantity of those at a time. But the pecans I keep in larger jars. Those will go in the refrigerator because I go through those really quickly. For dinner on this night, I am cooking barley. I do rinse it, and then I am going to cook it on the stove with bouillon cubes. These are both vegan. I have two flavors here. One is low sodium, and I have a blend of garlic powder, onion powder, black pepper, more of the roasted garlic that I defrosted from the freezer. Getting water into the pan with the seasonings and the roasted garlic. Adding in the barley. You do need to be really careful, not to let it splatter. On the side, I am making baby spinach. This is a 1 pound package. It looks like a lot, but it'll only make about 3 servings. This is garlic powder, onion powder, black pepper mix, more of the roasted garlic, salt, and then I do add a little water just because I don't want it to burn onto the bottom as it steams. And then I take the lid off and let some of that moisture evaporate out. Here is the barley, and the broth is really good too. And I opened the oven door here to let the steam come out before I got my face too close to it because I was also roasting vegetables. Here are baby carrots and cauliflower. This was frozen cauliflower that I just roasted with some avocado spray oil, seasonings, and salt. I really like the barley. It really retains a firm texture, which is great, and the sides turned out really well. I love roasted cauliflower and carrots, and the spinach. I like adding seasonings like the garlic to it. It just gives it a little more. I also personally will add a little vinegar onto it, but nobody else in the house likes that. The barley is also really nice because any leftovers, I can take the cauliflower, carrots, barley, and make a cold salad with that and just add, tomatoes or whatever else I have on hand for the next day. Going to make an egg and sausage casserole or bake. I have frozen parsley that's already, cleaned and everything, vegan sausage, frozen diced onions, smoked Gouda that was also in the freezer and I want to get used up. I had sliced peppers already cleaned and in the fridge to eat with hummus. grabbed a few of those out and ran them through this little food chopper so I could have smaller pieces to add to this casserole. Now, the food chopper does not get things nice and even. You'll have larger pieces and smaller pieces, but it's fine. But then while I had the cutting board out, I did dice up a larger dice on some green peppers, and I'm going to use those in a different meal. For seasonings, I have umami blend, and it's a mushroom umami blend, roasted garlic, that black pepper, garlic powder, onion powder mix, salt, and I have nutritional yeast out too. Into the pan, I have the frozen veggie sausage, and I will let that get softened up enough that I can use the meat masher to break it into smaller pieces. Now, don't stab like onto this because that'll make the oil splatter, so I do use like a rocking motion just to break it down. Let it cook for a little while just to get some brownness on it. Even though it's not real meat, it does add more flavor to it, and I do have to add quite a bit of oil, I feel like, when I cook vegan or vegetarian faux meats. Added a little more oil because that sausage really absorbed all of it. I have the peppers, the onions, and seasonings, and I don't know why. Usually I add in the nutritional yeast at the end. I threw it in there earlier. This is the garlic, and let that all cook down, especially the peppers. Added back in the sausage and the parsley. The parsley was mostly because I just wanted a green element in this. I just feel like that makes it way more visually appealing. Pre-mixed up the eggs, got those into the pan. I did not add any, milk or cream or anything to the eggs because I am adding in cheese. Got that spread all over the top, put the lid onto this cast iron pan and put it into the oven to bake. And the cheese got very melty. I did want to check to see if this was done, and it was. And I am going to put it back into the oven under the broiler for, typically I do 2 minutes, but I'll check it and let it go another minute if it needs it. And this was without the lid on for the broiler. This did not get tall. This remained a very shallow dish, but it was really flavorful and very easy because I used so many frozen things that it really didn't take much time to bring this together. And typically, we'll eat this for breakfast, but it's also a great lunch or dinner in a pinch, and it reheats very well. Now I am going to be making chocolate chip cookies, and this is flour that's whole wheat and all-purpose flour. I've got most of the ingredients out here. I had a few. This jar is a mix of milk chocolate and semi-sweet chocolate chips that I wanted to use up, and then I have a lot of the mini milk chocolate chips that I want to go through as well. And I am modifying it this time. Typically I do half butter, half shortening, which the blue and white container there is the shortening that I use. But this time I wanted to see if I could get a cookie that kind of spread out and got a little crispier around the edges. So I decided to go more butter, 3/4 butter, 1/4, shortening on this. Into the KitchenAid, I have the fats, egg, and sugars. This is brown sugar and white sugar. Getting that all creamed together and then adding in vanilla. I eyeball it, so I think I typically add more vanilla than a recipe typically calls for. Got the dry ingredients in, and I am going to add in chocolate chips. I do use the KitchenAid for this because I'm not using the whisk here. And here's how the dough looks. Seems pretty typical. It may be a little softer with more butter than shortening, but it's not going to be as soft or flatten out as much, I think, because I use part whole wheat flour. Rolled these, I use a scoop, and then I rolled them into balls and flattened them down. to make a more round cookie, and here's how they looked coming out of the oven. I don't usually do that step. Usually they're a much more, rustic or messy looking cookie, but these turned out really cute, and I feel like they were a little crispier. They baked very well. They pretty much all look like that on the bottom. I use really old air baked cookie sheets with parchment paper, and that just seems to work very well for all the cookies I bake. Here's how it looks inside. I think they did feel, you can see on my fingers there, they felt greasier too, but they tasted fantastic. For the next meal, I'm going to make a sloppy joe, but I'm using Impossible burgers. Those are non-meat patties that I had in the freezer. But this is not going to be a vegetarian sloppy joe because I am using regular Worcestershire sauce, which does have anchovies in it. The Impossible burgers, typically we get Beyond burgers. I don't like any of them. I think you kind of feel like you're eating cardboard with those, but multiple people in my family really like them, the Beyond burgers. So Walmart in my town doesn't carry those, but they carry the Impossible burgers. So I thought I would try them again, and nobody liked them as much as the Beyond burgers. Now don't get me wrong, the guys typically will order the Impossible burgers when we go out to a restaurant, but they do prefer the Beyond. So anyway, I thought it'd be good to use them up in a sloppy joe type recipe. In this pan I have avocado oil, onions, peppers, and Worcestershire. I'm also adding it to a second pan where I am cooking the burgers because I want them to be able to get a little crispy. Once that was cooked, I added it back in with the veggies, and I did put a lid on this for quite a while just to get those green peppers soft. Added in garlic, seasonings, and more Worcestershire sauce after tasting it. I also tried smoked paprika. I didn't like it. I won't do that again. Here's mustard, ketchup, and barbecue sauce. Got that mixed in, and this turned out pretty well. We ate all of this. It was a good way to use up the veggie burgers, and it's still great the next day as leftovers too. On the side, I had some frozen sliced potatoes, and I fried those up with seasonings and salt and oil, which they were frozen and already ready to go, so that was very convenient. I typically have bread in the freezer, ends of loaves that have been out for a while, so I want to just throw them in the freezer so they don't spoil. We also had this Trader Joe's whole wheat bread, which I found to be extremely dry. I didn't really like it, so I had thrown most of that loaf into the freezer as well. I went ahead and defrosted it and cut it up into pieces. I did large pieces to make some French toast casseroles, and then I did smaller ones, this smaller cube shape, to make croutons. I have a little glass, PYREX pan, spraying it with avocado oil, added in olive oil, and then seasonings. I typically do garlic powder, onion powder, black pepper, roasted garlic powder, and salt. I do stir this up or use my hand and just make sure it kind of gets coated in all of the seasonings. And then I put this in our little toaster oven. It has, it's an air fryer and a toaster oven. I typically will do these on toast and then maybe a little bit on air fry. I kind of wing it because I don't always measure how much is going in there, just until they barely get, a little crunchy. I had cherries in the refrigerator that I had defrosted. I'd been using them in yogurt, but I decided to use those up along with frozen blueberries. I'm not following a recipe for this, so I don't really know if it's French toast casserole or just like a bread and berry casserole, but I added on oil just to get some fat into this, and here are the cherries. I'm only putting these into one of the dishes. Now, in the past, I've typically made, like a 9x13, but I'm really starting to go towards using these smaller PYREX pans I have. I don't know what size they are. maybe like an 8 by 11. I'm not sure, 8 by 10. I'll have to look it up and I'll put it in the description. But anyway, I can make 2, put them in the fridge. They both, they're both cooled down, and I'll put one in the freezer. So you don't get so sick of maybe having the same thing every day. Have it for a few days, run out, and then, a week or 2 later, I can get out the second one. I'm using the KitchenAid mixer again with the whisk attachment, getting all the seasonings in here. There are eggs, and I do use quite a bit of cinnamon. And I have to say, this was the best French toast casserole I have ever made. And I think it's because if you saw that jar there where I was pouring in what looked like milk, it was actually homemade coffee creamer, vanilla coffee creamer that I had made. So it had powdered sugar, a little powdered sugar, vanilla, and half and half, and milk. And so it was much richer and much sweeter than I would normally make it. And I did add in just more milk as well. I eyeball this. I just want to make sure there's enough liquid in here so it doesn't end up dry. But it was so, so good. And I think I just need to add a little more sweetness. Typically I avoid that because everybody adds syrup on top of this when they go to eat it. But the half and half or full cream, that made it very decadent, and it was really good. Now on the top, I typically add, a drizzle of avocado oil and a sprinkle of kosher salt. I do cover these in foil. I really want to make sure it gets to, a good temperature to cook the eggs. And I do check this with a thermometer or with a fork just to make sure it is baked all the way through. And I will take the foil off after about half an hour and let it bake for another, 10, 15 minutes so that the top layer does get some crispiness on it. Here's how it looked. It was, like I said, I actually really love this. And I don't usually eat this stuff. This is more for the guys. They like this for breakfasts, even for dessert. I added butter and maple syrup, and I ended up actually eating all of this one. It was really good, and I think I had it on another day as well. So if it's around, because I don't always have cream or half and half on hand, but if I have it, I think I will start adding it when I make these breakfast, French toast casserole type things. On this day, I'm making a salad and I'm going to add feta cheese. I really like this 365 store brand feta cheese from Whole Foods. It comes in a brine, and I think that just makes a world of difference. I would assume, it's feta. The salt is pretty high on this, and that's one of the reasons I think I really like it. But it crumbles very easily. Put that over in a separate bowl, and now I'm going to chop up whatever odds and ends I had in the house that would be good in a salad. So I had lettuce that needed to get used up. You can see I had to go through and pick out the pieces that had some brown on them. But chopping these up, I chop things fairly small just because I'm lazy and I don't want to have to cut things up while I'm eating the salad. So I typically get rid of all large leaves. I want it all nicely chopped. Cucumbers, my husband does not like cucumbers, so I am putting those on the side. Using my food chopper again to chop up the peppers. And then I opened a can of black olives, and I am going to go ahead and put most of them into the food chopper as well to get those chopped up. And this is the point when I realized I did not put the blade back in, so it was not, working, so I had to dump those all back out and try again. Put the blade in, now they're all chopped, and you see here it does a really good job on softer things like these olives, but it is still going to have, larger pieces in there too. I had hand chopped red onions and cherry tomatoes, got those in along with these olives, and then I'll put the feta on top. And I find that people are much more likely, me included, to eat a salad if it's already ready to go and not just all the, ingredients are in the refrigerator. Here are those croutons I made the day before and the cucumbers that I had on the side. And since I had the cutting board out, I went ahead and cut up more peppers and then washed tomatoes and added in pre-cut fresh cauliflower and baby carrots into this dish, so you can just pull one dish out of the refrigerator, and have veggies to snack on or eat with hummus. Now for oatmeal raisin cookies, and I decided to do kind of the same thing I did with the chocolate chip cookies and try to get a crispier edge, more flattened out version of an oatmeal raisin cookie. So did the same thing here. So I did 1 part shortening to 3 parts butter instead of half and half. Adding in sugar. This is, regular white sugar and brown sugar. Getting that all incorporated. It's still chunky though because it was not super warm in the house on this day, and so the shortening was pretty, solid, but it'll get smoother as I add in all the ingredients. Put in the vanilla. The flour, I did replace part of the all-purpose again with whole wheat, and I do add extra cinnamon, like, with the blueberry muffins. I don't know if I mentioned it, but I do add extra cinnamon to those too. This is a mix of regular oats and quick cooking oats, raisins, and I'm going to add in chocolate chips as well. This is a mix of mini white chocolate and milk chocolate chips. They are Ghirardelli brand. Here's how the dough looks. It's pretty soft. I am not going to refrigerate this. I think the original recipe, which I think is a Betty Crocker recipe, I'll link it below, I may be wrong, you are supposed to refrigerate it. And I've done that in the past, but I just didn't feel like it today. So here's how they looked. And these definitely, way more than the chocolate chip cookies, these were flatter and crispier. And I think that maybe I should not have, rolled the chocolate chip cookies. I should have just scooped them out and they wouldn't have been as compact. But here's how the cookies looked. Got a little, crispiness on the bottom, not too much. And they weren't super thick. Of course, these are not 100% cooled down, so they're extra soft right now. But even a few days later, these still were soft, like they weren't hard to break or anything. And that's what I really like in a cookie. So I think I will keep doing that modification. So yeah, nothing new or exciting in this video. This winter and early spring, I just went with the basics and didn't have it in me to try many new things. I think the things that I did make were all things I knew would turn out pretty well and we would like. And I'm hoping as the kids are home now, I'll be trying some newer things again. As always, thank you so much for watching.